For the latest coronavirus-related information from our Lincoln University Cooperative Extension and Research COVID-19 Response Team, please visit http://bit.ly/LUCERCOVID19 or call the response team toll-free at 1-888-986-2990.
Those chickens are flying 200 feet plus up a hill. They're averaging over 30 miles per hour. Chickens can do things we don't usually attribute them being capable of doing. At least some chickens can do. Hello, I am Dr. Jim Wetzel from Lincoln University. I'm an associate professor of animal science. Generally, I specialize in fish, but since my early childhood, I've been involved with poultry. My grandmother was a producer of hatching eggs. On my mother's side, they have a long tradition of being engaged in game fowl. The two have come together and resulted in me maintaining a continuing interest to this day in chickens, especially in terms of their behavior. Now, when it comes to chickens and their role in our culture, they're very important, especially on the culinary side. The way they're raised these days is very different from the way they've been raised in the past, and it's very intensive. But yet there are people these days, and increasingly there are people these days, that are trying to engage in chicken production of their own in their backyard settings. A challenge we frequently run into is that we've largely forgot what a chicken is. What makes it tick? What does it need? And what are the limitations or opportunities you might have if you try to actually maintain them in the backyard, where they're actually able to make use of the resources there that the backyard might provide? That is what I'm going to try and begin the discussion with on today. To start with, we got to consider what a chicken is. A chicken is a domesticated hybrid of the jungle fowl. Most folks, when they're considering chickens in terms of what they're derived from, they immediately assume it's the red jungle fowl. That is correct, roughly 85% of the way through. They also have a significant component of gray jungle fowl. Those two species were probably hybridized at the very beginning of the domestication process, roughly 8,000 years ago. Thereafter, two other species were also introgressed into that hybrid domesticate. There was the green jungle fowl, and there's also the Sri Lanka jungle fowl. Those are particularly evident in species originating from Southeast Asia. All of these jungle fowl are relatively intelligent, they're relatively small, they are flighty, they are adapted to live in a natural setting or natural settings. They differ markedly in terms of what their habitat preferences are. With that in mind, we need to acknowledge the fact that our domesticated chickens still think they're red jungle fowl, okay? Even though they don't look the same, and in many ways they don't behave the same. Okay, the chicken we have today, okay, Gallus domesticus. Again, it's that hybrid from multiple species that's been selected. It's been selected to look very different from the way they started from those original wild jungle fowl. Look, they're much rounder, fluffier. They're much larger than those original jungle fowl, at least twice the size in most cases, especially those breeds that are of economic importance. Currently, there still remain 500 plus species of chickens, or sorry, breeds. There are 500 plus breeds. And that's probably only a fraction of what's existed through history. There's also some interesting points to make out in terms of variation in appearance. This little diagram to the right does a good job of showing how different the breeds are from each other, how uniform they are too within a breed most times, most cases. A key point I want to stress is that most are markedly different from the red jungle fowl from which they're derived, and even the other species as well. There is a common feature with these guys, and that is they're easy to tame. They're tolerant of handling. They're tolerant of the conditions that you might have that involve diseases or stresses involved with people being around. That's very important to how a chicken operates. And sometimes it does not always work to their benefit in a backyard setting. Okay, why do we value chickens? Let's break this down. For food, first of all, most of us eat chickens on a regular basis, especially here in well, basically almost everywhere these days. Meat. Chicken figures highly in terms of what most people eat. Additionally, there are eggs. Eggs are a big deal. And if you're into the backyard setting, that's often the most important aspect of keeping chickens is egg production. They can also be valued for fiber, not as much as they used to be, but they are still valued. At one point, in some breeds, the feathers were used to stuff pillows. Dominique's for an example of that. A current use for feathers from chickens is to make flies, tying flies for trout fishing and fishing for other species, where you make artificial lures. And some of the chicken breeds, like you see in the animal to the right, have feathers that are very good for that. And in some situations, the feathers, like in the lower left, can be used to make, it's for clothing or dress. They can also be used for the purpose of service. Many people keep chickens specifically for the purpose of incubating and parenting, either another species or other chickens. That was really the deal prior to the advent of incubators. And also brooders, and both of which came into the game at the time that people got electricity. Prior to that, you used chickens to incubate your eggs most of the time. And they can be used for pest management, where you can have the animals out near a garden or a fenceway, or where you've got some crops you're trying to protect, and you count on the chickens to consume the pest insects. And in some cases, they simply clean up spilt grain and help control the abundance of rodents. Another use for chickens that most folks aren't aware of in the Western world is their use for navigation. I think most of you are familiar with the funny dumb chicken, Hey Hey, from the movie Moana. That chicken represents something that in many ways was real until relatively recently. Hey Hey, Beccasaur. A Beccasaur is a hybrid between a domestic hen chicken, and a male green jungle fowl. The hybrid is, on the female side, is sterile, but the male side, which is rather pretty to look at, likes to crow. It crows a lot, and it produces a crow that's very distinctive. What you would have are Polynesian navigators out there moving between the islands, sometimes in groups of ships or flotillas effectively, and each one would have a Beccasaur on it. And the roosters would crow frequently, and it would allow the operators of the boats to know where the other boats were located, and even know their identification. That was particularly important at night and during poor seeing conditions, like when it's foggy or raining. The chickens basically operated like a bell on an old-style boat. They allowed the operators to communicate with each other. They were a good communication tool. Their sound carried very well. Another reason that we like chickens, especially in the backyard setting, is for pets or showbirds. There's a lot of people that keep chickens for pets. They're lap birds. They hug them. They cuddle them. Or they use them for show. They breed them to have a specific look, a specific feel, sometimes a specific way they crow. People really get into that aspect. The original reason that those first jungle fowl were probably hybridized and that initial selective breeding process was underway was probably related to fighting. 8,000 years ago, people living out in the woods or in the areas where the jungle fowl were occurring were seeing that the chickens, especially the males, like to fight. And being humans, a lot of the humans at that time and still to this day saw that as entertainment or as a status symbol to have a bird that was particularly good at it. Now then, let's switch gears and getting into things we need to know when it deals with keeping chickens in the backyard. When we talk about the biology, most of the time when I'm out in the world and I hear people talk about chicken biology, it's grossly oversimplified. You've got the eggs, you've got the chicks, and you got the hens. And that's oftentimes all the further the lingo goes. And sometimes that's not enough if you're trying to understand how to keep the birds properly, how to take advantage of the environments they might be using. You've got to have it a little bit more fleshed out, a little bit more detailed than that. And that's what we're going to try to do. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to break down the life stages of the chicken. And I'm going to treat it like a biologist. I'm not going to be treating it like someone who's in the show or someone who's purely the livestock. I'm going to be talking about this more in the way that a biologist does. And I'm still not going to get all the details. First, we start with the egg or the embryo on the lower left. Here you see an egg. It's got a narrow end on the bottom and a broader end on top. The reason for that shape, this has always fascinated me, is that it facilitates the egg being squeezed out of the hen's bottom. The narrow part on the bottom of it is the part that her reproductive tract squeezes on to push it out. Therefore, the broad, what appears to be the top end here, pops out first. It facilitates moving the egg through the chute. Okay? That, to me, has always been fascinating. When we talk about the eggs, under the conditions that we're interested in, especially if we're trying to have the animals reproduce naturally, generally speaking, once the egg is laid, it can sit around for 2 weeks or so, usually ideal a little bit less than that, prior to its start of incubation. Okay? Once incubation gets underway, it goes for about 21 days, during most of that, during the first 18 days or so, the hen, when she's sitting on those eggs, she's periodically rolling them around. She gets up and she gets around and moves her bill underneath of her and rolls those eggs around. She does that almost around the clock. If you have the opportunity to sit next to a nest where a hen's doing that, you can hear her rolling those eggs. At day 18, that ceases, and then a couple of days more, and you start to see or hear pipping. That's where the chick starts the hatching process, shown in the image down here, where the chick starts to sling forward with its head, and it pops a hole through the membrane inside the egg, as well as through the shell itself, using this device here, referred to as the egg tube. Okay, it's basically like a little, it just gives them a little bit more edge to work on as they're chipping. Once this begins, the pipping process takes place, the chick's already starting to talk to mama. It's also talking to its siblings. That's very important later on. And what's important right in the beginning is it's the start of the imprinting process between the mother and her offspring. Imprinting is very important. I'm going to stress that. The next step is zipping. Here we have a circle drawn representing the upper pole of the egg, and I have a line started indicating where the pipping starts. And then every single egg that we've watched, my son and I have done this several times now, the zipping always occurs in the same direction. If you look at the egg from above, it looks like the egg is zipping counterclockwise, always counterclockwise. The next step is roughly when the zipping gets halfway around the egg. That's when the top of the egg is popped off. The chick pushes out hard with its legs, and then ultimately it's able to free itself from the egg. During that process, during the zipping process into popping, the chick is twisting inside the egg. That's critical for it to get out later. The chick. Okay, this is the part that most people are familiar with. This is where their experience of chickens typically starts. The chick, when it first comes out, it's down colored. Take note of the head on these two chicks in the upper right. They are thoroughly covered in down. Okay, that helps them with thermal regulation. When the down is all fluffed up, they can stay warm. If they compress it, they can transfer heat between them and mama. This is also when they start to put in feather set 1, the first feather set. When chickens, which are, and other birds like them, which are unique relative to other birds, they go through 3 feather sets before they become adults. Most other birds go through 1 or 2 at most. The chick in the lower left, it's well into its first feather set. It still has down on its head. Okay. If the chicks are being raised in a natural setting, they are still dependent upon their mother for the duration of this process. They're dependent upon her for thermal regulation, for food. If nothing else, she's helping them find food. She's keeping them warm when they're looking for it. And she also protects them from predators and sometimes aggression coming from other chickens. Now, when I define chicks, again, they're down. These guys, all three images show chicks. The one, the lower right, is about to transfer or change into the next life stage. It still has a little down on its head, and you can still a hint of that black stripe that it had when it was younger. This is the end of the chick stage here. It's roughly 5 weeks post-hatch. The juvenile stage is next. At that point, the stripe is effectively gone. The entire head is covered in feathers. The entire body is covered in feathers. And they're starting to put in what I'm calling the second feather set, which in this case, upper right, you can see on the tail of this guy. This is the first feather set that's not been dropped yet, and this is the second set starting to come in. Okay. This again is the stage. It's a juvenile stage. You can generally discern their sex just by behavior, but in most chickens, you can also tell by the feathers in terms of color what gender they are. At this point, the hen is largely, if not completely, weaned them in most cases. That means she no longer broods them. She often does not protect their interest. They generally move around independently on their own. When I see juvenile chickens that are towards the end of the juvenile stage, what I look for to assess whether they're juveniles or not is if I see feathers here, the secondary feathers, particularly here on the circle of this bird here, that still have bars on them. Okay, that indicates that those are still feathers from the first feather set. If they still retain those, then I still classify those as juveniles. Generally speaking, juveniles are still all about growing. The subadult. Now here's where all the juvenile feathers have been lost, and now they're well into their second feather set. Generally speaking, they look like adults. They're going to have a coloration that's similar to the parents or would have as adults, but they're not as pretty. Also not grown yet. They're usually at this point, they're 3/4 maybe of adult size at best. The adult feathers, especially on this male, you can see them coming in, are also starting to erupt, especially on the tail end of the subadult development. Now, when these animals are subadults, the males at that point, I am calling them cockerels, and the females, you call them pullets. Okay, both of these are not sexually competent. The males may try to mate, but generally speaking, they are not able to sire offspring. They definitely do not have the behavior that goes with it that would help them raise offspring. Now the adult. Now these individuals are actually the same bird you saw in the previous image. The hen on the right, she is much heavier in her weight now, more rounded profile, darker feathers on the tail. All of her feathers are in. These are all the feathers are in. The male is also is much heavier. His feathers are completely in. His sickle feathers are very well developed. His hackle feathers, this is what sets him apart, are very well developed. A lot of color, which this image does not show the best of, and the saddle, lots of pretty feathers here. The birds are also, it's not depicted well here, but their comb and their wattles are able to change color now and indicate that they're high in rank, especially on the males. They can flush that to indicate aggression or excitement, or they can make it become light in color, indicating they're trying to be submissive. All kinds of things become much more prevalent in adults now. Now let's talk about social structure of the chickens, the natural social structure. The default social structure of the animals, especially when they're breeding, is the harem. The harem is made up of the harem master, that's the dominant male or cock. At that point, he's a year old, and he will do all the behaviors needed to take care of a family unit, and brooding age females. Usually within a group of a harem, the number of hens is typically 1 to 3. It's not 7 or 10. It's a smaller number than that. That's because the hens kind of disperse themselves a little bit there. It's not good for them to all have to share the same cock if they have the option. Then there's also the offspring. That includes the embryos, the chick, the eggs, the chicks, the juvenile, all part of what the harem is made of. And the subadults are generally still as part of the harem, at least at first, until they get ejected. And then there's also, more likely than not, and I see this frequently, and it's definitely known for the jungle fowls, red jungle fowl in particular, is that you have satellite males. You have a subordinate male, usually he's also an adult, that hangs around the periphery of the harem. He's in communication with it, and he is ready to sneak in and mate a hen if he can. He is also one that will take over the role almost immediately if the original harem master disappears for some reason, which in nature that does happen. The chickens, if they're operating under these conditions, are also prone to want to establish actual territories, especially if the sex ratio is even and the habitat is diverse and suitable for that. And in addition to territories, now territories, when we define that, that's when the birds actually own a piece of real estate and they chase everyone else out as best they can. Home ranges where you can have groups that overlap in terms of where they move around. Okay, there's a lot of chickens that will employ that range, and they may even be intermixed with animals that have territories. The satellites are often would be the ones employing home ranges, as well as juveniles when they are booted out. When we talk about flocks, that's when you have groups that, in my mind, are not associated with reproduction. They are simply either trying to grow and survive and prepared for the next breeding season. Flocks are seasonal generally. I don't start seeing those until the middle of summer, and they usually persist until roughly the winter solstice or shortly thereafter. That's when you start switching back over to the harem system. The harem system I see once the daylight starts getting longer, and it continues through roughly the middle of summer. Okay, thereafter flocks become predominant. The same group of birds can do both. Another thing to consider is that birds, the chickens, they're smart. They're smarter than we give them credit for, and they communicate a lot. They say a lot. And most of us just think they're clucking or they're cheeping or they're crowing. In reality, there's a lot more to what's going on with the birds. If you watch them, you can see the postures, how they arrange their feathers that indicate whether they're aggressive or submissive, or if they see a threat. I'm going to show you examples of that on how they respond to a threat. It's very indicative of the situation they're in. They've got movements, specific movements that can indicate what's going on. They can, as I indicated before, the comb and the wattles can change color. That is used frequently in how they communicate. The vocalizations, they say a lot. They've got basically sounds that indicate, come here, this is me, food's over here, all sorts of things. Predator calls, all sorts of things. Physical contact. The birds can use the beak like an aggression, or for preening, alloprene, they can preen each other. They can use their feet. So usually that's when they're using feet against each other, it's not nice, it's being aggression. And then body, they can touch each other, or they can pop each other with their wings. In that case, that's an example of aggression. Or bump each other, another example of aggression. Or jump on somebody else's back, that's rude. Now, when it comes to all these methods of communication, they're saying things. It's more than just making these communication efforts. It has meaning if you sit there and watch it. The sounds of contact calls in particular. They make contact calls that indicate that I am here. They know each other's voices. Remember the imprinting process I mentioned before. It is I am who, or who I am. That way they know that who they're hearing is somebody that they do know or not. They also, their voices can indicate who is higher ranking or who is lower ranking. And it can indicate if you're trying to submit or trying to avoid a conflict. I give up. I'm going to say it again. They have things they say about predators. Numerous calls. They've got multiple calls for hawks. When they talk about hawks, they indicate how far away it is and it's heading, or if it's coming, incoming or otherwise, and if they perceive it to be a threat. If the hawk does not appear to see them, the sounds they make are very subdued and used to be only heard between the chickens. If the chickens think the hawk sees them, then they make the sound loud enough so the hawk can hear them as well, so they can let the hawk know that they are aware of the hawk. It's part of the talking back. And then you've got many resource calls. The birds indicate when they find water. They indicate when they find food. They even indicate when they find different types of food and quality of food, and sometimes even the quantity. Sometimes they don't make a call. And what's really cool that I have seen is they don't tell folks that aren't their friends or their family if they find something to eat. If they find something and there's somebody that's not part of their family close by, they say nothing. They just eat it and take advantage of it. They don't share. Another stress something I'm going to stress is the process of imprinting. It's often overlooked in keeping chickens in any kind of setting, definitely in a production setting, but also in a backyard setting. We're not always on top of this. Imprinting, most of the time, most of the people, when they do recognize it, involve the chicks on the hen. The chicks know their mother. They know her by her voice. It's nothing else. My chicks go only to the voice. And the mother knows her chicks based upon their voice. If you stick another chick in her batch that looks exactly the same, but it sounds different, she's going to pick it out and she's going to run it off. Very good at that. And then the chicks know each other. They know their siblings and they know who's not. If you have two groups coming together where the chicks look alike, they still will not intermingle because they know that they are not of the same family unit. And here's what gets really cool. The father knows his chicks as well. As soon as he starts interacting with them, he starts putting his head down with those chicks and he listens to their little cheeping sounds, their little peeping sounds. And he makes sounds back. The chicks know him and he knows them. That becomes important later on. If a chick comes into his social group that's not his, more likely than not, he will run it off, especially if he has his own set of harem. When you have hens on the nest, they need to know where their nest is. They can't just randomly lay eggs anywhere. What they have to do is they have to keep going to the same place. They imprint on the location. Another form of imprinting that I can see and I manipulate is they learn where they're at. They don't just go walking off into the wild blue. They develop a home range that they know. They also imprint on a roost site. They consistently go to that same roost site. That's important to them. They don't just change the roost site every night. And that can be manipulated to keep them safe or out of trouble. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about reproduction. Get down into the nuts and bolts a little bit in terms of what you see in a backyard setting, in terms of how it's done. When we're keeping chickens in a backyard setting, especially if you're concerned about reproduction, you got to know what you're looking at, or at least know enough not to interfere appropriately to ensure or increase the odds you get successful reproduction. Because you want to get to this point here, where you've got a hen with chicks. Okay, there we go. The first thing, I want to show you a quick little video. This will be one of a few that I have, which shows what the birds, the first stage in courtship, where in this case I have a rooster that does not have a harem, and coming in the background is a hen who does not have a mate. And what the emphasis is going to be on what the male is doing, as he's trying to impress that female, because there are other males around in similar pens like this that female is checking, and each one is doing his little dance to try and impress her. Okay, ideally, if he had his way, he'd already be there with her and doing a little dance around her. But here we're trying to emphasize the sound. He's crowing. The crowing helps is as important for other roosters as it is for the hen. Tell the other roosters that he's around, he's in good shape. Now, what you cannot hear in the video.
Object of his attention is a hen on the far side of the daylilies, and she is approaching. This is a hen that's not had access to a rooster for probably the last 2 months. And she is well outside her normal territory, looking for a chance to be exposed to a rooster. The hens that currently occupy this area have not seen her.
Okay. What you can see there is the rooster is doing some of his initial stages of trying to court the hen. He is trying to show off his colors. He is producing sounds that we can't hear very well. If you look right down here, these white feathering here, he's showing his cotton. A good healthy rooster is going to have a lot of cotton. He's going to hold it up and be able to sustain that. He's going to move around rapidly. If we can see it more clearly, he's probably going to have much more red in his comb. If he is a rooster in inferior quality, especially if one that might have worms, you might see a purple tint on his comb and wattles. Hens don't think that's sexy. The hen, when she's walking around, which I can't show you at the moment, she tries to make her body look relatively fat. She pinches her tail off so it's roughly at a 45-degree angle coming out. And she's making sounds that tell the roosters in the area that she is looking for a boyfriend. And that's, again, that puts them in the mode to court. Now, another thing that's going on here is that part of the roosters, not only is he trying to show how good he is at some point going to show the hen that some of the resources his territory has. It's going to be concerned with food. He's going to try to get over to show her some food items, feed her, and hopefully that leads to mating for him at the very least. And then if things move the way that he wants, he's going to end up trying to show her a place to make a nest. The rooster has a role in that. Okay. Here's a video where I had actual mating and I couldn't get the words. So. Okay, in this case here, I've got a video that actually shows nest site selection, where the male is actually trying to show a hen where to place a nest. When we did this video at the St. Louis Science Center, the hen ultimately adopted the nest box that we're showing here, this milk crate, and put her nest in there. She was following him around, checking every spot that he did this in to see what looked like a good nest site. Okay, in that case, he was doing exactly the same thing that a hen would do to prep a nest site in terms of moving his legs around. He was scratching out a nest ball. It's the same thing the hen will do once she starts prepping a nest to put eggs into. Once the nest site is selected and it's prepped, the location is generally it's hidden usually. If they're doing it out in the field, which this is an example of, which is not ideal, the hen will find a place that's bushy, a little bit bushy, but so it's got a view, so she can sit in it and see any approaching threats coming in, especially if she sticks her head up. What she'll do is she'll get in there, she'll scratch out a little nest bowl, ideally in a location that can stay dry, and sometimes she'll take vegetation from around it and put it around to make it so that you have basically a little nest bowl that's got, it looks like a little robin's nest in terms of the fibrous material. And then she starts to lay eggs. When a hen lays eggs, she doesn't do them all at once like a dinosaur or turtle does. What she does is she sneaks into that nest site once it's prepped, once a day, and lays an egg. Then she goes off and mates and hangs with the rooster all day, and she does that for several days until the clutch is filled or it's set. At that point, she begins the incubation process. When the hen is going in and out and when she's on that nest, she's got to use extreme discretion. The hen and her clutch is very vulnerable to predators. There's many things that like to eat eggs, and there's many things that would not pass up the hen if they can catch her as well. That's easy to see in a backyard setting. Additionally, there are parasites. Now, when I'm talking about parasites, it's not things that are growing on the hen or in her intestinal tract. I'm thinking of other birds, especially other hens, especially young hens, that will try and find her nest and lay eggs of their own in her nest. and makes it so that she has to dilute her parenting efforts by raising someone else's kids. Brood parasitism. The hen tries to avoid that. Okay, now here is an example of brood parasitism. The hen that's prepping the nest and getting it ready to go is the one that produced the white egg. There was 2 other hens that are producing the brown eggs that found her nest and put their eggs in there. And they will have little or no role trying to raise those chicks. They're just trying to put some kids in the kindergarten or the van. Okay. The next step is incubation through hatching. Once a hen has her clutch set, then she sets up to actually rear her offspring in that nest. And that first part of the rearing process is the incubation through the hatching. There's a lot of growth and development going on during that. The first thing I look for when a hen actually commits to the incubation component is she stays on the nest all night, and usually most of the day. She'll usually take a couple of days off each day, usually in the late morning when it's sunny, and she'll go run around and go to the bathroom. And then she eats a lot, and then she gets back on her nest. I've been watching this in a more controlled setting and found that the hens, once they're in a brooding mode, especially if the environment's relatively mild temperature-wise, eat at best only half as much food as when they were producing eggs, which is rather interesting to see. Again, during this time frame, the hen invests heavily in egg rolling. She's moving the eggs around a lot. That's when she's doing that, she's got to be careful. It makes it so she's easier to see by predators. And I don't know if you noticed initially with the jungle fowl hens, but those were all brown or relatively drab. They were cryptically colored. A lot of our hens, like this example that I'm showing you here, a lot of our domesticated hens, because we breed them for color, they stand out big time, nesting where a hen would normally want to nest. So they're not cryptically colored as it could be, at least the example I'm showing you here. On the tail end of the incubation, or we get into the hatching component here, I'm going to stress something again. That's when you start getting that imprinting going on between the chicks, hen, and both ways on that. And that's a very dangerous time. The chicks are talking, the hen is talking, and a lot of your predators, especially mammals, are operating off of sound when they're trying to locate a food item. And this is the time it's especially vulnerable for a hen with chick or on a nest. When it comes to hatching, again, that's the high risk. It's more than just sounds. There's also the issue of scent. Hatching chicks produces smell. It's pretty easy to pick out. And then again, the sound inside I just mentioned. Again, this is the most demanding time for a hen when she's on the nest, is during that actual hatching process. Chick rearing. Okay, this is here I'm going to give you examples or show roughly what's going on when the birds are actually moving around on their own. There is a lot of conflict between thermal regulation and feeding. Little chicks need to stay warm, but they also need to eat. During the first 24 to 48 hours after they hatch, they've got lots of yolk reserves left over from when they were embryos they can fall on. Okay, towards the end of that, they've got to start eating. They got to start moving around. And when they're doing this, they've got to get away from where that nest was. They've got to get out to where the food is. And they got to balance that looking for food with staying warm and dry. Here's an example of where there's a little bit of a conflict going on. It's very obvious. Here you've got a hen with relatively old chicks. These guys are about 4 weeks of age. They were out foraging when there's a heavy rain that was relatively cool. They were out looking for bugs and all kinds of fun stuff, and it rained very heavily from the storm system Cristobal. The hen got very wet. The chicks got fairly wet, but they stayed reasonably warm. But while the rain was going on for roughly, they were trying to stay dry, they could not forage. They had to sit there and stay dry as best they could. Because if they got too wet, they would get hypothermia and that could lead to Once the weather broke, then they started to feed. Now here we cheated. I put food out there for them where they could get to it. If they had to go out and look for it, it would be much more difficult. They would be fighting the urge to stay warm and dry, at the same time trying to ensure they get plenty to eat. Now when they're out eating, the first thing for the chicks to want to go after are arthropods, insects in particular, spiders, and they'll go after like worms and things of that nature as well. What they consume, they recognize by movement. It's instinctual to go after it moves, but they also peck at pretty much anything. They also learn by experience, by doing it themselves. But the hen's role cannot be ignored. She helps them find concentrations of food items, and in some cases, she helps them subdue it, especially if it's a larger food item, like little frogs and things of that nature. And even dad can have a role in that. He can help them find food. It's kind of fun watching how the dad can help feed everybody. It's the chicks he's feeding, not the hens. He's feeding the chicks. Another thing that's been pretty cool when the hen's out there teaching her kids is she comes across something that's nasty, not good to eat, like a tiger moth or a lot of insects that have red on them, especially those that come off of milkweed plants and the like. She'll make a very distinctive trilling sound. The chicks will respect that and back off and often make the trilling sound themselves. And from that point on, nobody shows interest in eating items like that. Okay, now here, this is, oh, not too fast. Okay, here is a little video showing chicks eating and seeing and make it so that you could hear the conversation that's going back and forth between the chicks and each other and their mother. In this case, I put out some live insects, and they're relatively small. These insects are small. They're very small. There's no urge to compete or very little for the food items, and they're easy to consume. I'm going to stress that these foods are easy to consume.
Nice. Mealworms here, small, much smaller than before. Behavior is different. Definitely different. Much more, they're almost acting as if the part of the food items are like pellets or pieces of feed. They're not treating it.
Okay, that's with smallish prey items. This video did not work, or it's not linking up properly. But here I gave them mealworms, or an insect that's much larger in size, and what they would do is they pick them up and they run off with them. At first glance, it would appear that they're just trying not to share. But in reality, when they're doing that, when they're doing those little chases and what appears to be fighting with the food items, it's actually helping them process those larger food items so they can swallow them. And here, the next slide, it actually demonstrates more clearly what I mean by that. Here, I've got a very large prey item in the form of a male Chinese praying mantis. I threw that down amongst a group of chicks, and not only do they assail it, but they actually work together to dismember it in the end. I'm only going to show you a portion of it. They have to dismember it before they can consume it. And one chick has a very difficult time killing and dismembering a healthy praying mantis. They're talking to each other like a little bunch of raptors. Okay, now they're going to run back and forth with it and start tearing it apart. They have to kill it first. It looks like chase, but in the end, these little switches back and forth and pullings help them dismember the prey item. Okay, the next thing I want to address here very quickly is what do the chickens really eat if they have a choice? Most of us, when we keep chickens, we're throwing feed out there, okay? That keeps them tight, it keeps them round, it keeps them fat. But if the chickens had to do it on their own, which they can, at least most of them can, they would start to have a diet that's very different, and oftentimes, in my case, healthier than what I can provide. Most of what they consume, especially once they get a little size to them, is vegetative greens. They eat lots of green stuff. And they don't just eat any piece of green material. They eat the stuff that's darker, got color to it. It's usually freshly, it's new growing, rapidly growing. It's easier to digest. It's got more protein in it, more vitamins. They're cherry picking. And some plants they flat out don't like. A lot of the plants, grasses and the like, and fescue, they're not that keen on. Legumes, they are all over that. If they have a choice and they're not limiting invertebrates, they will eat more of than anything else, and they will invest a lot of effort into it, as you can see in those prior videos. Invertebrates, especially for the young chicks, are extremely important. They will also target fruits if they can find them. Now, generally speaking, in the environment, fruits are hard to come by, especially on the ground, because everybody likes to eat that. And some problems I've run into is they come across fermented fruits like persimmons that have fallen. You can mess around and find some drunk chickens, which can be fun in its own right. Seeds. Now, in reality, the feeds that we made are made up of soybean and corn and all that. So and when we're keeping them confined, they eat lots of seeds. When they're free range, they'll eat seeds. But they don't eat as much. And they'll eat a surprising variety of seeds when they're out there right now. They'll eat grass seeds for sure. Basically any kind of forage seeds. They'll even eat entire acorn seeds, swallowing them whole. They have the ability to grind that stuff. Vertebrates, like small frogs, toads, especially small ones, lizards, snakes, mice. Mine have a penchant for indigo buntings. They like to eat that stuff. And they'll eat carrion. If they come across a carcass, or if I drop a deer off in the backyard, it's been roadkill, they will shoulder themselves with the dogs and try and eat that carcass, and they will eat a fair amount of it. Chickens are omnivores to the extreme. They are like hogs and us. They'll eat whatever they can find. Okay, other issues that we're going to be concerned with here when we're keeping these birds deals with, let's go next. Yeah, we do. We're out of sequence here. When we're talking about what we're going to be trying to supply these birds with, in addition to food and things of that nature, the next concern we're going to have is the roost. Roosting sites. This is the area that they typically, when they're doing their business around your yard or in the fields and what all have you, this is what they basically anchor their life around, the roosting site. This is locations ideally located. In this case, it's not elevated. It's a chair in the front porch. Ideally, it's protected from the elements. This one's not. This is a guttering above the front porch on the roof of the house. Ideally, it has reduced visibility from predators. No. In this case, I have a roost site that's actually placed inside the house, where I stuck up a stick the birds liked, and they would go up there and actually roost on. These are a group of early juvenile chickens roosting on a stick. It's got to have enough room. If there's not enough room, people get knocked off. Okay. Here is a better roosting site on the front porch, elevated. It's protected from vision above, and it's protected at least from one side from predators coming in that might use vision, particularly owls. And it's also protected to a degree from the weather. Okay. It's got to have space. In this case, you see an actual harem. You see the cockbird, you see the dominant hen with a group of about 8 chicks, and you see the subordinate hen with a group of 7 chicks. Another thing that we're trying to supply here is forage. Here is a series of pictures that show good examples of what quality forage has. It has a variety of plant types, many species of plants. It also has many heights in terms of plants. In this case, in the upper right, you see tall plants in close proximity to very short. They spend most of their time feeding in the short stuff, but a lot of their food's coming from the tall stuff. They like to be around places like this. It's good cover. Okay. When you see birds moving around in a place like this, they usually stay within 20 or 30 feet of these edges, like you see right here. They will go into areas like this in the understory of a thicket and feed. Okay, here it's relatively open. The food abundance is extremely high, not only with the plants, but also with insects and things of that nature. They like variation in the habitat. It needs to be diverse. Here are some examples of not good. Many people keep their chickens and the like where the area is totally denuded of plants. It's done a lot, especially with people using runs. If the chickens aren't getting out far enough, they can cause a similar situation to this. A lot of people keep chickens. They don't have to have as many to do this. That's what you see here, but you can have enough to denude an area. And this is going to happen in your backyard setting as well. And even though you may have a plant community present of some sort, the most of it that they can eat it's eaten. And there's very little in the way of insects as well. The birds are just going out and enjoying themselves away from confinement in that case. Here's what most people are doing with the backyard setting. They've got the real pretty backyards, very uniform grass. They might have some trees, but that's not real cover. It doesn't provide cover from anything, the trees, which we'll talk about later. And the grass, that monoculture of the very same species that provide the least nutritional value to the chickens. They don't like eating grass, especially all the same kind. And habitats like this generally don't support much in the way of insects. Here's one that's marginally better based upon fescue. The problem with this type of a setup is the grass is too tall, the diversity is very low, and the insect assemblage you associate with this is relatively low. Diversity. And here's something else you'll see from time to time. You'll see people keeping chickens in what is effectively a woodlot. A woodlot where there's very little in the way of understory. This provides very little in the way of food. It provides very little in the way of protection. There's no way to get away from a block view of a ground predator. Raptors can come and eat you all day long. Another thing that I look for when I'm keeping chickens outside is the issue of cover. It needs to have ideally a canopy to block predators from above, but it also blocks sunlight. Chickens can get hot. They can get hot enough that it makes them not want to eat. Having a canopy overhead helps that a lot. It gives them shade. Stems, here in the lower right, at the very least, you can see the stems in here. Stems can actually do a huge deal when it comes to blocking wind, especially during the wintertime. It helps reduce airflow. Those are good places to stay if you're trying to stay warm. It also reduces the ability of things like hawks to fly and just come in and get you. It makes it so they can't fly in as easily. Make it so the hawk's on the ground, you got a better chance of dealing with it, especially if he hasn't caught you yet. Another thing that they like to see with their cover patches is it needs to have an open area to the south or southeast, especially if it's cold. Have a view. And they also like to have sun coming in the early morning hours to either stay warm as they need to or dry off if they're trying to get dew off of their feathers. Next consideration is pests. In a backyard setting, this is one of the most frequent problems that I have to address, personally even, is the issue of pests, predators. And the ones I deal with the most, and they're not always after the chickens, they're often after the feed and other things, are your climbing omnivores. Here in the United States, the Virginia possum is going to be your biggest player on that. They are the most abundant in my case. They're always around, and they don't move much. They basically live around where my chickens are. Generally, they're focused more on feed and spilt feed, but they won't pass up eating eggs. And the larger possums will take on, and they can kill even an adult chicken. But that's usually not the case. If I can get my chickens to roost up, generally speaking, we're safe from the Virginia possum. The next guy is the raccoon. The raccoon is much smaller, more agile, a stronger climber, and when it comes to being a predator, it's more capable. Not only will it get after younger birds, it will go after adult birds, especially if they can't get away. And it's more apt to actually climb up on a higher roost to try and get birds, and then follow them if they get up down on the ground. Raccoons are really prone to mangling lots of birds at once. Both of these characters, when they're killing chickens, they give a very consistent pattern of showing they've been there. The raccoon, or the possum, likes to bite at the chicken from the backside and eat the entrails out a lot, but will eat everything if it gets a chance. And the raccoon will jump on the chicken and wrestle it. They're not real good at it. That's why it's so messy. And they'll bite it all over the head. And then when they finally kill it, You can see during the eating process, the chicken looks like it's been slobbered on all over the place and rolled around. The raccoon also often operates where there's more than one, which makes it, again, a lot of chicken killed and consumed at once. Here's another group of pest organisms when it comes to chickens, and these are the canids. For me, the most important one is the red fox. I have a red fox coming on my property every night, and that's with dogs. And even if you've got large livestock guarding dogs, this little dude will come in and try and go at, or at least hunt your area. This guy's a specialist in operating, even though he gets periodically chased off. He's hard to keep out. So you got to do some things to keep him from being able to get to the chickens easily. Here's another one. I don't see this one as often, but if you live in a more wooded area, the gray fox can be problematic. This guy here is pretty good at climbing trees and pulling chickens off the roost. Both of them can climb trees. Both of them can jump very well, but the gray fox is really good about climbing trees. Both of them, if they start working your chicken yard, are very consistent about when they come in. The next one that I deal with, but not as often, is the coyote. They'll periodically come out and catch your birds out in the open in particular. For me, they don't go into the heavy bush that much. That seems to be more of what the red fox does. The gray fox, or the coyote catches you out in the open. The one that causes me the most difficulty, or has, and the one I see the most consistently causing folks problems, is the domestic dog. This little guy, who's now one of my best chicken guardians, killed 30 birds at once. He got busy. And that's nothing for domestic dogs to do that. And they'll just leave them laying there. While these, the wild canids, what they kill, they typically take away. The domestic dog typically kills and lets them lay, although some dogs will eat them. Felids, both of these guys I've dealt with, they're cats. The one that I've dealt with actually the most frequently has been the bobcat, and that gets my birds out when they're operating in the heavier, bushier stuff, and it actually catches them in patches, because that's where the bobcat likes to hang out. And they're big enough, they can take on the biggest chickens you got. I believe you take down turkey. Domestic cats, I've had some dealing with them. Most of the time, they're targeting immature chickens, juveniles, especially after they've been weaned by the hen. A lot of hens will readily go after a cat and repel it. But once the chicks are weaned and independent, if nobody's around to protect them, then cats can be a problem there. They can be. Most cats are not that way, but feral cats in particular can be a problem with this. The next group of predators that are concerned in a free-range backyard setting are mustelids. The one that I've dealt with the most is the least weasel. I very seldom see this little guy, and he's not there usually to get my chickens. He's after rodents. In my setting, his primary interest is in getting voles. And even though I might be able to keep most predators out that might dig themselves their own way in, the least weasel, he's going to come in following the trail or the burrowing mouse to get in. He's hard to spot. I mean, he can get through, if it's the size of a quarter hole or it's a little bit bigger than that, at least weasel can get through there and he can take on your biggest chickens. And sometimes he'll kill more than once. Another guy that you get into, especially if you're near any type place where water flows through, is the American mink. These guys can kill multiple chickens at once, and they'll often pile them up when they do it. They're not a good character to deal with if you got some bottom land. They can come in and cause all sorts of trouble. Their relative, the striped skunk, is not as good at tackling larger prey items, but if you've got chickens that are confined and can't get up, the skunk will catch them. It's a mess, and it will kill them, and it will eat them. But it's not really good at hunting larger prey items like its relatives, the least weasel and American mink. Rodents. Now, rodents, for the most part, I usually associate them with going after feed. The mice and the rats are definitely of that sort. And the vole, they're usually going after the greens in the pasture area. The voles, again, their biggest offense for me is they make it so that other predators can actually get into my where my chickens are confined, if they're confined or during times of not being free range. The mouse, focusing on that little guy, they can go after very young chickens, especially if they can get access to the young chicken's feet, because they will get right underneath the hen. They will eat the toes off the chicks. That can be a problem. During the daytime, though, the adult chickens will eat the mice. And that's kind of funny to see that operation play out. Norway rats, you got to watch them. Most of the time, they're not an issue, but if they're abundant and they're hurting for food, they will go after larger things. Sometimes chickens are half grown or better. And they will often attack and cause damage that doesn't kill, but it maims. You want to keep the abundance of those two critters under control. The mouse, the house mouse and the Norway rat, you want to keep their abundance low because they can be problematic. Okay, this is what's particularly relevant in a free range setting, diurnal raptors. When I see something that makes me think a hawk or owl, or a hawk in particular, when I don't actually see what happened, is I see a mass of feathers on the trails. That's not typical, but here they don't always do it the same way. But when I have a hawk come through, if I can't find a carcass, or even if I can find the carcass of the chicken, I usually see feathers all over the place around where the chicken was killed and processed. Here's the one that I see the most if the area is open, if I don't have a lot of cover. The red-tailed hawk. This one's often called the chicken hawk. This guy here will go after adult chickens. It will also definitely go after young ones as well. Again, it does not go after cover and go into cover very well. Once I have a lot of cover going up in my yard, I no longer see these hawks coming in. But they can take larger prey items. And for me, they're most problematic during the winter months when the cover, the plants in particular, the leaves have come off. Here's an interesting example of a red-tailed hawk consuming a chicken. I'm not going to put you through that, but you can see where the feathers are basically all over the place, and there was quite a struggle prior to the chicken or the hawk actually starting to consume its prey item. Okay, here's another character that I deal with more frequently in my setting, even though I have lots of cover. The Cooper's hawk, which you see an adult in the upper right and an immature bird in the lower right. Both of those were caught in my chicken pens trying to catch chickens. And the lower right bird got into the wrong pen, and a hen with chicks got a hold of him, almost killed him if I didn't get there quick enough. These guys typically target immature chickens. For me, in my setting, adult chickens are relatively immune, especially if I have a rooster around. But what you can see in the lower left is a link to a video where you have a Cooper's hawk, a large Cooper's hawk, posturing over what appears to be an American dominant hen, which is probably 3 times the weight of the hawk. So they can take larger things than immature chickens. But most of the time when I've seen these guys at play with adult chickens, there are no roosters present. My roosters run these guys off very quickly. Let's see here. Okay. Come on. There we go. Nocturnal raptors are actually, for me, a much bigger concern than diurnal raptors. And the most important one is the great horned owl. Now, here's where I'm going to have a neat little video. Oftentimes, I don't see the great horned owl, especially in the evening. It'll come in. The chickens will see it, but I won't know where it's at. But I know it's there based upon what you'll see in this video, because it's very consistent. Listen carefully. Okay, the sounds you could hear there, that is the sound that chickens produce when they can see a great horned owl anywhere, usually above, when it comes into view. And that sound can be heard from a very long distance away. The great horned owl is a big pain in the keister for me. I can tell if he comes in, even if he's not there, even after he's gone. Take a look at this video of some chickens sleeping happily on a roost in a protected area in the barn. These guys free range during the daytime. At night, I lock them up for good reason. Isn't that sweet? You could hear nothing. You could see them all with their heads tucked into their feathers, making little no noise. Nothing's going on. Now check this out when an owl comes in. Next slide. Come on. Come on. Okay, here's what the chickens do when they can see the owl. It's very close by. It's in the dark. They can barely make out. They know it's there. Look at how they're all fluffed up. See their tails, all stuck at that characteristic angle. A lot of times they'll also put their heads down if they can't see the owl. In this case, they can see it because the owl is right next to the camera. No, they're making sounds, but very quietly. Turkeys do the same thing, wild turkeys. So apparently that's a good way to deal with owls. Now, most folks, when they think of owls, they think of them as being up high somewhere. I see them on the ground a lot. They constantly mess around on the ground. In this case, I got an owl messing around a trap that's been baited for a fox. And if he's not careful, I got a trap right here on the ground here. Don't want to catch a little guy in there. Later on, I accidentally caught him in this. But owls do a lot of time on the ground. And here's another example of walking inside the barn. This guy is not just after chickens. He is catching insects and mice and even bullfrogs. They had bullfrogs coming in. This guy is hunting on the ground. If I don't see or get pictures of the owl, I've got another way of knowing that they've been around. A typical thing I'll see is I'll find a bird at dawn that is headless, necklace, and sometimes part of the breast is gone. But I don't see the explosion of feathers usually, and the feathers where the bird has been eaten is not all slobbered on. There's not a lot of slobber on there. It's dry. This are birds that represent what I typically find when an owl is involved. It takes off the head. Here's a guy I don't see as often, the barred owl. The barred owl, when I have them coming in, it's getting juvenile chickens. They're extremely exposed. If I have a great horned owl anywhere near, this guy does not show up. This guy only takes exposed immature chickens. I've not had one take an adult chicken yet. I've also had to deal with short-eared owls who will come in and go after a brooder, the actual device where I raise young birds without a hen. I've had short-eared owls during an eruption where the owls are very abundant, come in and try to get my owls actually in that house. Owls in general, you gotta be watching out for them. They will take on things that are comparatively large. So owls in general, you gotta watch out. Here's another character that I have to deal with, snakes. Black rat snake. They consume eggs and chicks, particularly at night. They do it a lot. I have all kinds of fun with these guys. I often leave eggs out in the nest, an entire clutch, with the intent of having the hen go broody. The snake will eat them just before the hen goes broody. And sometimes the snake will eat them even with the hen sitting on them, or it'll eat the chicks. That occurs mostly at night. During the daytime, the snakes typically get unpleasant welcome from the chickens. Come on. There we go. Here I'm going to show you what the chickens do when they see the same type of snake, probably the same individual during the day. Trying to catch a chicken.
hen's going to fight it. It's a big snake. It's a, I think it's, we're going to catch it here in a minute. Yep. See the hen's going after it. See her? See, it's going to try and catch a chickie, and when it does, I want to catch the snake. We're going to film it doing it, though. See? The mommy snake, if the rooster was here, he would go after it. It's definitely hunting for chickies, but it's probably after mice, too. See it hunting, guys? See it? It's hunting. It's probably, it can eat a chicken if you catch one. It's big enough. It's probably after mice mostly.
What I just showed you is a black rat snake that can also be aggressive in hunting. In this case, it was after mice, but it was checking out the chickens. The chickens, even the juveniles or the chicks, were mobbing the snake. Everybody was there harassing the snake. So they were making it so that the snake was not having an easy time hunting. And a smaller snake, they'll attack and damage, and a real small snake, they'll eat it. Another snake I don't deal with as much, but I have had to deal with this hombre, and that is the bull snake. This one is a reason I don't like having hens with nests out in the open in the fields in particular. This guy normally goes after larger rodents and rabbits, but if it finds a hen on the nest, it will take every chick she's got or an egg, and sometimes it will even eat juveniles. I keep the chickens roosting up or in the barn, and we're good on this guy. But it's the biggest snake we've got. Here's one that's been a pain, especially for my dogs, but this one can cause mysterious deaths with where the chickens will be out there free ranging, especially where it's brushy or a little thicket. And then the chick, you'll hear a brief sound of somebody being startled. You'll have a chicken walk in and start to stumble sometimes. It'll be dropping its wings, having troubles breathing, and then it will pass away within a couple of hours. Usually a little bit of blood coming from the mouth or the nose. The Osage copperhead for me is the biggest perpetrator of that. It's not trying to eat the chickens. The chickens got up on it. Sometimes the chickens would probably harass them. And that's in part because the smaller snakes in particular, the chickens will often try to eat. But in general, as you saw before in the video, the snakes are vulnerable to being victims of being harassed by the chickens. In this case, the copperhead can fight back effectively. When it comes to all these issues, trying to protect these birds from the problems I've tried to point out here, it can be expensive in a free-range setting. The birds got lots of behaviors, but you got to figure out how to integrate those behaviors in with methods you use to protect the birds. The main conclusion I would have with that is the process is ultimately expensive, either in terms of what you throw at it money-wise or your time. For me, there's a lot of time that goes into this. And it takes a lot of experience. You gotta learn how to mess up and then recover. You gotta have backup plans. If you got fox coming in, what are you gonna do? You're just gonna keep letting the birds run loose, or you're gonna pin them up? Or are you gonna trap, or are you gonna shoot? What options do you have? You gotta be flexible. You can't say, well, I will not do or will not do that. You've got to be willing to change your methods according to what the problem you have. You need to always be monitoring. Check your chickens every day or every night, every morning. Early in the morning, that's how you can discern what the diurnal predator versus nocturnal predator. Know what's going on. I check them at night to see what's going on. You got to know the signs of a particular predator, whether it be how it damages things, how the birds, what kind of alarm calls they're giving, how a carcass looks, or is the carcass present or not. All this is basically ultimately going to be a form of pest management, trying to protect your birds. If you're going to keep chickens in a backyard setting, you're going to be constantly managing a lot of interactions, complex interactions. In the left, I use dogs. If I don't use my dogs properly, they can be a threat in their own right. If done properly, I can exclude most predators very well. It takes time. You've got the chickens and the dogs. You got to get them used to each other. You got to get things working the way it needs to work. You've got to have the human side of it and the birds. Everybody's got to get used to each other. You got to be able to communicate with everyone. The birds got to learn to trust you. If they don't, you can't keep them where they need to be at times, even in a free range setting. If everything's working the way it should, everybody should be able to rest easy at night, and otherwise take advantage of what your free range habitat can be set up to provide.